I saw 3-0, and I thought maybe I'd stumbled upon Pac-12 baseball scores in the spring. We're here with Tony Saragusa from Last Word on College Football to break down the UCLA spring game. This, of course, MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Tony, so much to talk about with this spring game. Of course, we joke and we relate scoring to things to talk about. Therefore, lack of scoring, nothing to talk about. But I'm sure we will just captivate the audience talking UCLA football over the next few minutes. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thanks.
So this 3-0 game, you told me that it wasn't necessarily a rock fight. There was some offensive plays between the 20s, but the team's just kind of bogged down in the red zone, I guess.
Yeah, you know, if points were allocated for moving the ball between the 20s, then, you know, they would have been blowing up the scoreboard at Drake Stadium at UCLA last weekend because there was a lot of moving the ball between the 20s and then just completely bogged down offenses inside the 20s, just completely unable to convert inside the red zone. So if you're UCLA fans, you really don't know what to take away from this. I mean, Chip Kelly was always going to play it close to the vest. A lot of coaches do. They're not going to show a lot in a spring scrimmage. There's no reason to. UCLA isn't really trying out a lot of players in positions, at least in the starting position category. They're looking more at depth and backups. And so there was that to look at in the game. And then really just any improvement that you could get out of the younger players from last year who are now, you know, a year older, and you're looking for that maturation in them. And so if you're Chip Kelly, if you're the fan, if you're a fan and you could break it down into really that granular level, there were things to look at. If you were a fan looking for Dorian Thompson-Robinson to go throw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns, you walked away scratching your head going, man, I'm not sure where this is going right now. A lot of offense, not a lot of scoring, and some great defense, actually.
Now, see, the issue with the lack of scoring also is that you don't give the band an opportunity to practice with the lack of touchdowns. The band can't strike up and go nuts.
That's true. It was the music part of it was pretty quiet during the game. There's no question about that.
We've got Tony Saragusa on the line talking UCLA football following the annual spring game on Saturday. Tony was right there with a throng of how many people there at Drake Stadium?
Probably between 2,000 and 3,000.
Okay.
It's about what UCLA typically draw for a spring game.
Well, a lot of these schools make a big deal out of that and brag about the numbers of fans that they can bring to the game. I don't necessarily put a whole lot of stock in that one way or the other. The thing to put stock into is something that you talked about before we started to record, and there's no other balancing act in any other sport like there is football in regards to how much do we allow these kids to knock heads to gain a true evaluation of football being blocking and tackling at its core versus, hey, we want our best athletes and a number of healthy bodies ready to go when the whistle blows for good and for real this August. So the juggling act of keeping players healthy versus being able to evaluate accurately.
Yeah, Chip Kelly kept a 60-minute running clock for this scrimmage. I mean, no stoppage of clock for anything. We're going to play 60 minutes. We're going to rotate players in and out. And really wasn't even necessarily a here's the ones versus the twos, because he had his backup quarterback, Austin Burton, getting a look with some of the first-string wide receivers. So it was a lot of kind of mix and match to see who could do what and with what talent on the field. But as I pointed out in some of my articles leading up to the game and then even after the game, the key for UCLA was to come out with everybody standing upright after the game. UCLA is very, very thin in terms of depth on the offensive line, and they've got a little bit of help coming in and some freshmen in the summer, but it's not there right now, and they don't have a lot of margin for error. And of course, as you and I have talked about, there is no backup quarterback with any game experience behind Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So the key was we're gonna go full speed. we're going to go 11 on 11. We're going to mix and match the rosters a little bit as we go along, and we're going to come out of it hopefully in one piece with no one any more worse for the wear than they were when they went into the game. UCLA at least seems to have accomplished that. You never know what happens in the trainer analysis, you know, a couple days after they look at the bumps and bruises, but at least there was never a trainer on the field looking at a player during the scrimmage. And as trite as that may sound, for UCLA right now, it's significant. They've got depth in a lot of positions, but not offensive line and not necessarily quarterback. Austin Burton, the presumed backup, had a good scrimmage. He actually really did. He looked better during the scrimmage than he has throughout much of camp. But we're still talking about a guy who's never taken a snap in a college football game. So imagine, if you will, you know, you're in, you know, mid-September and something happens, goodness forbid, to Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and you're at the Rose Bowl against Oklahoma, and now you're having to put in a kid who's never taken a snap in a college game. There's not a lot of margin in terms of health for UCLA right now. They seem to have at least gotten through that in spring.
It's time for UCLA Talk here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please lock it in right here if you love the game that we love. Share the video, subscribe, of course, like and comment. And if you have yet to look at much here that you can make those commitments, certainly dive into the library and give it a look. We aim to deliver the best in discussion, debate, and analysis, and certainly get a big lift from Tony Siragusa from Last Word on College Football, specifically on UCLA and the Pac-12. So, man, 3-0 again. Let's not necessarily focus on 3-0 or this particular game, but as you scan the entire breadth of 15 practice sessions, plus this scrimmage in particular, what are the storylines that you come away with that make you feel maybe a little bit better or worse about this team?
Sure. I think one of the things is you're seeing the expected, anticipated, hoped for maturation in Dorian Thompson-Robinson that you would get from a freshman to a sophomore who played significant games as a freshman. What you see in the live scrimmages in the scrimmage Saturday, but also during practice, during camp, his reads on his progressions are coming a little bit quicker. His throws have a little bit more zip on them. And when he is forced to leave the pocket, you know, pass rushes on him and he's forced to roll out, it's not what typical freshmen do, which he did quite often, which is just tuck and run. You see him now still keeping his head up, directing receivers, looking downfield, still trying to throw the ball downfield, even on the run as he has to leave the pocket. So there's a little bit more of a maturation in how to move the offense downfield that you would hope to see from a guy who played the way he did as a freshman and now going into a sophomore year, who is clearly the ordained starter. There is no quarterback race at UCLA right now. He is the starter, period. So I think that's a big thing. The starting offensive line has looked good throughout spring. They didn't look great in the scrimmage Saturday, ironically, but they've looked good throughout camp in opening up holes and pushing for the running backs, getting to the second level for the running backs, which a lot of times they just don't do. They haven't in the past. Putting Boss Tagaloa at center last year was one of the genius moves of Chip Kelly throughout the season, because it solidified that offensive line. And so, you know, they've got Chris Murray and they've got Jake Burton and they've got Alec Anderson. They've got a solid front five. They don't have a lot behind that. The second string offensive line is not getting that same kind of push in the running game and not getting the same protection in the passing game. So there's that. Receivers, running backs, deep roster. No questions about it. You return Theo Howard at wide receiver. You return Joshua Kelly at running back. No questions there. The linebackers are coming up big for UCLA. There is a lot of depth there. You're looking at guys like Chris Barnes, who came up big in the scrimmage the other day. You're looking at Josh Woods has been hurt. He's going to be a starter when he comes back, so he's missed most of camp. But you've got a lot of good production out of the linebackers. So that's an upside for UCLA. And the defensive backs played well throughout most of camp. Darnay Holmes, Quentin Lake, guys like that played really well. They've got to replace Darius Pickett and Nate Metters, who left for with graduation. But they have, but they've got some good talent back there. Jay Shaw has played well. Shea Pitts has played well. So they've gotten some good production out of the defensive backs and the linebackers.
You know, Tony, it's been my assessment that I don't know that there's a positional coach, by and large, across the board, that is more influential on a game and on the team than the offensive line coach. The offensive line coach, because of the cohesion required with that unit that's unmatched across the board on either side of the ball, number one. Number two, because of the mixing and matching of, do you go with a number of players who are very good at their particular skill set, but then if you have an injury, are you opting to go with the 5 best athletes, 5 best players, or where you might be compromising technique and skill set and experience at a particular line spot, or do you fall into play with keeping the depth chart in order and all those things, and just the development of these guys, where it just seems like they have an insane responsibility in college football, the way it's played today, with the freakish athleticism and speed on the edge that they have to deal with. And these kids on the defensive side, they can just shoot gaps and are just so quick, so fast, and disrupt plays, what they're asked to do. And then the coaching just seems to come into it. So you seem to have a pretty good base if Dorian Thompson-Robinson's as good as advertising, can develop fairly quickly with the complement, as you mentioned, of the running back and the wide receiver positions that seem to be pretty well fortified. That if your offensive line coach can work some magic just to maintain that, you've got a semblance of a decent offense.
You do, and again, you talk about, they're losing. UCLA is losing Andre James. He left early, leaving for the draft. By any assessment you look at, and scouts that I've talked to, he's not going to get drafted. He'll get a shot, maybe as a free agent somewhere, or at least get invited to a free agent camp somewhere. But he's not going to get drafted. It's not a huge loss to the UCLA offensive line. I don't mean to speak ill of the young man, but in terms of the core of who's there, Boss Tagaloa and Chris Murray being back, were key. Jake Burton, Alec Henderson. So the core is there. Again, the backups, I mean, you've got a guy like Sam Mazzaro who got some playing time last year. He was decent. But honestly, if you're a UCLA fan, you're already looking at some freshmen who are going to be coming in the summer, in Sean Ryan and in Duke Clemens, guys who could be playing quickly if there is an injury, kind of jumping the line, if you will, no pun intended, because you need some immediate impact players if you lose someone on the offensive line if you're UCLA. And Sean Ryan out of San Juan Capistrano here in Southern California was the only 4-star recruit in Chip Kelly's recruiting class this year.
Here's the deal, folks. We love talking football here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, so please lock it in. We got Tony Siracusa on the line from Last Word on College Football to talk UCLA. I see where Chip Kelly has landed a 4-star quarterback in Parker McCory. That's only 2 commits for the 2020 class. Is there any concern? Whether you want to dive into any particular targets, that's completely up to you, Tony, or just keep it broad topic in regards to Chip Kelly underachieving in the recruiting rankings last year. Again, we'll see how it plays out. Those are just rankings. But in regards to, most teams have their allotment of the 5 to 8 to 10 variety of commitments at this point. I'm seeing 2 out of UCLA if there's concern that he's behind the game again toward 2020.
I think he's a little bit behind the game in terms of commitments, but not in terms of the effort to get the commits like he was previously. I was critical of his effort the previous year. I get it that he came in late. He started, he was hired at the end of the season, December. He had maybe a couple of weeks before the early signing period. He was just trying to make sure that he kept the players that were already committed. There was all that. You give him some leeway. But I was still critical of, there wasn't a lot of outreach to the local high schools by him. There was from the assistants, but not by the head man himself. there's a lot more effort being put into it this time around, and it seems a little gimmicky, and I get it. But on the 8th, they have a thing that on the 8th of every month, be sure you check that UCLA football Twitter feed, the Facebook page, and the Instagram page, because there's going to be a list of players that they've made offers to. Kelly's MO in the past has always been, I'm really tight with the offers because, one, I got to be sure you can get into school, which is no easy feat at UCLA. And 2, I got to be sure that there's a high probability you're even going to come before I'm even going to, make that outreach. He's loosened that second part up a little bit. Clearly not the first part. The academics at UCLA are the academics. In general, there are kids with 4.3, 4.4 GPAs that are getting turned down on the general admission side. So, it's no easy feat even for the athletes to get in, even with a little bit of leniency and leeway. But he's loosened up that back part a little bit, where he's willing to go out on a limb and make some offers. So he's throwing out about 8, 9, 10 offers a month now that he wasn't doing before. It was 1, 2, maybe 3. So I think in the end, the numbers will be there. Are they there right now? No. But coming off a 3-9 season, you got a lot of recruits who are taking a wait and see, what kind of progress is made. Where does this offense go compared to what it was last year? I think once you get more into the fall camp, which, I always love that phrase, fall camp, because it, basically starts in July. But once you get into that and you have more recruits visiting, then they get a more sense of what the season looks like as you get closer to the season. I think that number will pick up significantly.
Tony, you know the deal here. We're neutral. We cover college football across the board, but I'm going to let this out, and I think you know this. I'm rooting for you. I'm pulling for you. I would love to see UCLA be relevant. Would love to see it.
Yeah, look, and obviously, you're not alone. There's a fan base out there that hits me up with questions on Facebook and various social media outlets. That's like, my goodness, what does it take? There are a lot of people who are restless with Chip Kelly already after year 1. I get it, but you got to give it some time. I mean, the man was not going to come in and turn over everything right away. Again, right now, there is a lot of experience depth at a lot of the critical positions. Like I said, you look at, the linebackers, you look at the receivers, you look at the running backs, there's a lot to work with. And so, the linebackers, like I said, if you get Josh Woods back healthy, Keyshawn Lucier South had to leave spring camp due to academic issues. Don't know what those are. But if he's able to get that corrected, he was a critical part of the UCLA defense last year. And you add them to guys like Tyree Thompson and Javari Anderson and Chris Barnes, that linebacking core is going to be ridiculous in 2019. So there is a lot of upside. Now, when I say a lot of upside, I'm going to say guarded upside. They're not going from 3 wins to 10, not in a million years. But there's no reason this isn't a 6 or 7 win team in 2019. There's no reason they don't double the wins and go to a bowl game, because the talent is there. It's about the health and about the reserves on the offensive line.
Starting in early to mid-October, this team was so much better than they were in September and the first week or 2 of October when you consider the results, and not all the wins came. But there was a point that I think we even leverage this conversation that, could this team go 0-12? Is it possible? Against that schedule, they could have gone 0-12 because they got behind against, Fresno State was better than expected, and Colorado beat them and so forth. But then they hit that Washington game, and I expected, boy, this is going to be an ugly mess. And they were in that game to the wire. They went to Cal and won. Cal turned out to be a pretty legit team, a good bowl team. They beat Arizona. The Utah game was ugly. I watched that game start to finish, and that's when they had this tiny window of opportunity to get to the Pac-12 championship game. But down the stretch, besides the Oregon game, getting blown out by 3 touchdowns, Arizona State, a 3-point loss on the road, beat USC, played within a touchdown of Stanford. It wasn't bad. It wasn't awful.
Yeah, there was. It was an interesting conversation about 4 or 5 weeks into the season in the post-game press conference after one of the games at the Rose Bowl, when I asked Chip Kelly where he felt the team was in terms of the process, because a lot of the players were using this phrase, you got to get through the process. In other words, you got to believe in what you're doing. You don't jump off the rails just because things aren't working. You fix it, you tweak it, you make adjustments. They started getting production from Joshua Kelly, the running back at that point, who wound up being the first 1,000-yard rusher for UCLA in several years. They had to go back and forth at quarterback with the injuries that they had to Wilton Spate and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, so there was a lot of juggling there. But you could see the improvement, and the players were talking about, yeah, we lost, and there's no such thing as a moral victory, but man, we were right there and we could feel it. And it was interesting because at that point I asked Chip Kelly, what about the process? Where are you in the process? And his answer to me was, Tony, that's an interesting question because I've never once used that phrase. And, as a reporter, you're sitting there saying, I got my laptop right here with about 8 sound bites with you saying the process, but, I'm not looking to start a beef with Chip Kelly, by any stretch of the imagination. But if you listen to the players, there was a process. And it was a developmental process for what was one of the 5 youngest teams in the country going into the season. And so you could see it work even in some of the losses. Again, there's no such thing as a moral victory in football, but you could see the team getting better. You could see the light go on. The running game developed for the first time in several years, behind an offensive line that, again, I can't emphasize this enough. Once they took Boss Tagaloa off the defensive line and made him the starting center, it made all the difference in the world in that offensive line. And they've looked really good this spring as well. So it's there. The pieces are there. The player development is there. The talent is there. The receiving core goes 5-6 deep easily. The running back core goes 3-4 deep easily. You just got to keep Thompson-Robinson healthy or get a viable backup who's played. Again, nothing against young Mr. Burton, but he's never taken a snap in a college game, and you got to develop some depth in the offensive line in the event of injuries, which happen during a college football season. Beyond that, the talent and depth is there.
All right, Tony, it's always a good conversation. Appreciate you stopping by, and we will see you soon, hopefully.
Always glad to do it, Mark.